In the history of American capital punishment, only 54 women have faced the ultimate penalty since executions resumed in 1976. Of those 54, 8 women crossed a line so unthinkable that society demanded their lives in return. What drives a wife to become an executioner? What transforms wedding vows into death sentences? Tonight, we delve into 8 cases that redefine the meaning of "till death do us part" and examine why these women joined the most exclusive and terrifying club in American criminal history. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to True Crime Inquiry for more shocking cases that changed America forever. 1. Wanda Jean Allen, the repeat killer. On January 11, 2001, Wanda Jean Allen became the first black woman executed in the United States in 47 years. But what exactly did she do to end up on death row? On December 1, 1988, Wanda murdered her girlfriend Gloria Jean Leathers outside the Lexington police station in Oklahoma City. The two women, both 29 years old, had been involved in a tumultuous relationship marked by jealousy and escalating violence. Earlier that day, Gloria had gone to the police station to file a protective order against Wanda, seeking legal protection from her increasingly dangerous behavior. As Gloria left the police station that evening, Wanda was waiting for her in the parking lot. Without warning, Wanda pulled out a .38 caliber pistol and fired a single shot. The bullet struck Gloria in the back, sending her collapsing to the pavement just steps from the building where she had sought protection. She died at the scene. But this wasn't Wanda's first killing. 7 years earlier, in 1981, she had shot and killed another girlfriend, Deetra Pettis. Wanda had pleaded guilty to manslaughter in that case and served only 2 years in prison. The system had given her a second chance. She used it to kill again. When police arrested Wanda at the scene, she immediately claimed self-defense. But the evidence told a different story. The fatal shot had entered Gloria's back, contradicting any claim of a face-to-face confrontation. Witnesses reported seeing Wanda wait for Gloria in the parking lot, suggesting premeditation rather than spontaneous violence. During the 1989 trial, prosecutors presented Wanda's criminal history to the jury. They argued that she had learned from her first killing how to manipulate the system, only to commit an even more calculated murder 7 years later. Wanda's defense attorneys countered with evidence of her intellectual limitations, citing an IQ between 69 and 80. They argued she lacked the mental capacity for premeditated murder. The jury wasn't convinced. On May 15, 1989, they found Wanda guilty of first-degree murder. 3 days later, they sentenced her to death, making her the first woman on Oklahoma's death row in over a decade. For 12 years, Wanda's case wound through the appeals process. Her execution would make history as the first black woman put to death since Betty Jean Butler in Ohio in 1954. The case attracted national attention and protests, with activists arguing that executing someone with intellectual disabilities violated constitutional protections. On January 11, 2001, 41-year-old Wanda was executed by lethal injection at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary in McAlester. Her final meal consisted of a bag of barbecue Fritos and a Dr. Pepper. Prison officials noted she remained calm and cooperative throughout her final day. Strapped to the gurney in the execution chamber, Wanda gave her final statement. Quoting Jesus Christ's words from the crucifixion, she said, "Father, forgive them. They know not what they do." At 9:21 p.m., the lethal drugs began flowing through the 4 lines. She was pronounced dead at 9:15 p.m., becoming the first black woman executed in the United States in nearly half a century. Wanda's execution reignited national debates about capital punishment for defendants with intellectual disabilities. Her case would influence future legal challenges and contribute to ongoing discussions about mental capacity and the death penalty. 2. Betty Lou Beets, the Black Widow of Gun Barrel City. On February 24, 2000, Betty Lou Beets became the second woman executed in Texas since the Civil War. But what exactly did she do to earn the nickname Black Widow and end up on death row? Between 1970 and 1983, Betty systematically murdered at least 2 of her 5 husbands in what prosecutors called a calculated scheme for financial gain. Her small property in Gun Barrel City, Texas, became the final resting place for men who had made the fatal mistake of saying "I do." The pattern was devastatingly simple. Betty would marry, secure life insurance policies on her new husband, then eliminate him once the paperwork was in order. This wasn't passion or desperation driving her actions. This was murder for profit, executed with the cold precision of a business transaction. Jimmy Don Beets, husband number 5, became her final victim on August 6, 1983. At 46, he shared more than just an age with his wife. He shared her fate. Betty shot him and buried his body in her backyard, then told anyone who asked that he had simply left her, abandoning their marriage without explanation. For nearly 2 years, the lie held. Betty collected on Jimmy Don's life insurance policy while maintaining the fiction that he had walked away from their life together. But she hadn't counted on her own children eventually telling the truth about what they had witnessed in their home. The breakthrough came in 1985 when authorities received information that led them to Betty's property. What they discovered in her backyard transformed a missing person case into a double homicide investigation. Jimmy Don wasn't the only husband who had never really left. Doyle Wayne Barker, husband number 4, had been buried there since his death years earlier. Both men had been shot, both had life insurance policies, and both had made the fatal mistake of trusting Betty Lou Beets. Police launched a comprehensive investigation that unraveled Betty's web of deception. The evidence was overwhelming. 2 bodies buried in her yard, both shot to death. Life insurance policies that had paid out substantial sums to Betty. Her children's testimony revealed the horrifying reality of what had happened to their stepfathers. Prosecutors sought the death penalty. In her 1985 trial, Betty maintained her innocence, constructing a defense that blamed others while portraying herself as a victim of domestic abuse. Her attorneys even suggested that her son might have been responsible for the killings. The jury wasn't convinced by the defense's alternative theories. They saw through the claims of abuse to the calculated nature of the crimes. 2 dead husbands, both shot, both buried in the same yard, both carrying life insurance policies that benefited the same woman. The pattern was too clear, too methodical to be anything other than premeditated murder for financial gain. Betty Lou Beets was convicted and sentenced to death. She spent 15 years on death row, maintaining her innocence even as appeals failed one by one. Her final appeal was rejected, and her execution date was set. On February 24, 2000, at age 62, Betty declined a special final meal. In her final statement, she spoke of her love for family and her readiness to meet her Lord. She was executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville unit in Texas. Betty's execution closed a chapter on one of Texas's most notorious Black Widow cases. She had turned marriage into a deadly business model, treating till death do us part as a financial strategy rather than a sacred vow. Her story continues to raise questions about domestic violence defenses and the intersection of abuse and murder. With Betty Lou Beets' execution carried out, Texas had demonstrated its willingness to execute women who committed the most heinous crimes. Her case would be studied for years as an example of how financial motives could drive someone to commit the ultimate betrayal of trust. 3. Marilyn Plants, the contract killer's wife. $300,000. That was the price tag Marilyn Plants placed on her husband's life when she became the first woman executed in Oklahoma since 1903. Her case would prove that sometimes the most dangerous person in your life is the one who shares your bed. On August 26, 1988, Marilyn orchestrated the brutal contract killing of her husband Jim Plants in Oklahoma City. At 27, she appeared to be living a stable suburban life with her 33-year-old husband. But beneath the surface of normalcy, Marilyn was planning Jim's murder with methodical precision. The conspiracy involved her lover William Bryson and hired killer Clinton McKelvey. The motive was purely financial, a $300,000 life insurance policy that would make Marilyn wealthy and free to start a new life with Bryson. The plan was devastatingly simple in conception, horrifying in execution. Jim Plants returned home that evening expecting the safety and comfort every person deserves to find in their own house. Instead, he walked into an ambush orchestrated by his wife. McKelvey and Bryson attacked him with baseball bats, repeatedly striking him before loading him into his own truck to complete their contracted murder. The beating was methodical and merciless. They didn't simply kill Jim, they brutalized him before transporting him to finish the job. The final act was designed to destroy evidence while ensuring his death was both certain and agonizing. Police launched an investigation that initially treated the case as a possible accident. Marilyn's performance in the aftermath was as calculated as the murder itself. She played the grieving widow with practiced precision, her tears theatrical, her shock manufactured, her grief a complete fabrication designed to collect insurance money. But contract killings rarely remain secret. Clinton McKelvey eventually broke under pressure and confessed, exposing the entire conspiracy. His testimony didn't just admit his own guilt, it named Marilyn as the architect and Bryson as her co-conspirator. Prosecutors sought the death penalty. The evidence against Marilyn was overwhelming once McKelvey provided the roadmap. The insurance policy established clear motive. The coordinated alibis revealed extensive planning. Physical evidence connected all three conspirators to the crime. Most damning was the realization that while Jim was being murdered, his wife knew exactly what was happening and had made it possible. In her 1989 trial, Marilyn was convicted of first-degree murder and conspiracy. The jury rejected her defense team's attempts to discredit McKelvey's testimony. They couldn't dispute the insurance motive, couldn't explain away the coordination between conspirators, and couldn't overcome the mountain of evidence proving Marilyn had purchased her husband's death. The jury sentenced her to death. Marilyn Plants spent 13 years on Oklahoma's death row, maintaining relationships with family members who continued supporting her despite her crimes. Her appeals were repeatedly denied, with her final appeal rejected years before her scheduled execution. On May 1, 2001, 40-year-old Marilyn was executed by lethal injection at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary. She requested an elaborate final meal and spoke of love for her family and readiness to go home. Prison officials allowed her to have fried chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, strawberry cake, and cherry limeade. Strapped to the gurney, Marilyn gave her final statement expressing love for her family and asking for forgiveness. She was pronounced dead at 9:20 p.m., becoming the first woman executed in Oklahoma in nearly a century. Her execution ended one of Oklahoma's most calculated contract killings, a case remembered not just for its brutality, but for the cold-blooded greed that transformed a wife into an executioner. Marilyn Plants had proven that betrayal could take its most devastating form within marriage itself. With Marilyn Plants' execution carried out, Oklahoma had demonstrated its willingness to execute women who orchestrated the most heinous crimes. Her case would be studied for years as an example of how financial motives could drive someone to the ultimate betrayal of trust. 4. Frances Newton. The case that divided Texas. Was Frances Newton a calculating killer who murdered her own family for insurance money, or an innocent woman executed by a flawed justice system? Her case became the most controversial execution in modern Texas history, raising questions that persist decades after her death. On April 7, 1987, Frances murdered her husband Adrian, 7-year-old son Alton, and 21-month-old daughter Farah in their Houston home. At 21, she appeared to be struggling with the same challenges facing countless young mothers across America. But what separated Frances from other struggling families were the life insurance policies she had quietly secured on each family member. 3 members of her family were found shot to death with a .25 caliber pistol. Adrian, Alton, and baby Farah had all been killed while Frances claimed to have been away from the house. She told police she had returned home to discover the horrific scene and immediately sought help. Frances presented herself as a grieving wife and mother who had lost everything in a senseless act of violence. She spoke of unknown assailants, of a home invasion gone wrong, of being the sole survivor of a tragedy that had destroyed her world. Her tears appeared genuine, her shock seemed real, and her loss was undeniably devastating. Police launched an investigation that quickly revealed troubling details. The life insurance policies on all 3 victims created a clear financial motive. Forensic testing revealed nitrate residue on Frances's clothing, suggesting recent contact with gunpowder. Most crucially, ballistics experts linked the murder weapon to Frances through evidence that would later become intensely controversial. Prosecutors sought the death penalty. The case against Frances was built on circumstantial evidence that prosecutors argued formed an unbreakable chain of guilt. The insurance policies provided motive. The forensic evidence suggested opportunity. The ballistics connected her to the murder weapon. In her 1988 trial, Frances maintained her innocence with unwavering consistency, insisting she had not killed her family and that the evidence against her was flawed or fabricated. Her defense challenged every aspect of the forensic evidence, arguing that the science was imperfect and that circumstantial evidence, no matter how compelling, could not support a death sentence. The jury sided with the prosecution, delivering a guilty verdict and death sentence. Frances was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to death, making her the first black woman to face execution in Texas since the Civil War. But their verdict did not end the controversy surrounding her case. Frances Newton spent 18 years on death row while her case attracted national attention from advocates who questioned the reliability of evidence against her. Legal experts pointed to problems with ballistics testing, issues with forensic procedures, and concerns about whether the evidence truly supported the certainty required for execution. Her appeals were repeatedly denied, with her final appeal rejected by the courts. On September 14, 2005, 40-year-old Frances was executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville unit in Texas. She declined to order a special final meal, accepting the standard prison fare. Prison officials offer her a final opportunity to make a statement, but she remained silent. Strapped to the gurney, Frances chose not to give any final words. Her silence in those final moments reflected the same unwavering stance she had maintained for 18 years, that she was innocent of murdering her family. She was pronounced dead at 6:22 p.m., becoming the first black woman executed in Texas since Reconstruction. Her execution closed one of Texas's most debated capital cases, but it did not resolve the questions about forensic evidence reliability that her case had raised. Frances Newton's story continues to fuel debates about the death penalty, the reliability of circumstantial evidence, and whether the justice system can ever be certain enough to take a life. With Frances Newton's execution carried out, Texas had demonstrated its willingness to execute women despite significant controversy over evidence. Her case would be studied for years as an example of how circumstantial evidence and forensic science intersect in capital punishment cases. 5. Teresa Lewis, the genius husband killer. $250,000. That's what Teresa Lewis calculated her husband's life was worth, but prosecutors would reveal an even more shocking truth. She didn't just want Julian dead. She wanted his 25-year-old son Charles eliminated too, because in Teresa's twisted mathematics, 2 deaths meant double the insurance payout and 0 witnesses. On October 30, 2002, Teresa orchestrated the contract killings of her husband Julian Lewis and his son Charles in Pittsylvania County, Virginia. At 33, she had perfected the art of manipulation, understanding that desperate men would do desperate things for the right combination of money and affection. What she hadn't counted on was how quickly those same men would betray her when facing life sentences. Teresa's plan began months before the murders, when she started cultivating relationships with 2 younger men, Matthew Schallenberger and Rodney Fuller. These weren't random encounters. Teresa specifically targeted men she could control, men who needed what she offered, men who would kill for her. She promised them money, intimacy, and a future together once her inconvenient family was eliminated. The conspiracy revealed a level of calculation that stunned investigators. Teresa didn't just want Julian dead. She orchestrated every detail of a double execution designed to maximize her financial gain while minimizing her legal exposure. Charles Lewis became a target not because Teresa hated him, but because he represented a potential obstacle to her inheritance claims. Teresa's strategy was devastatingly simple yet chillingly effective. She would provide inside access to her home, leaving doors unlocked and security systems disabled. Schallenberger and Fuller would handle the actual killings, while Teresa maintained plausible deniability through a carefully constructed alibi. The insurance money would flow to the grieving widow, who would then share her windfall with her loyal accomplices. On that October night, Teresa left her home knowing exactly what would happen in her absence. Julian Lewis, 51 years old and trusting his wife completely, had no idea that the woman sharing his bed had purchased contracts on both his life and his son's life. Charles Lewis, 25 and building his own future, couldn't have imagined that his stepmother saw him as nothing more than a financial liability to be eliminated. Police launched an investigation that initially appeared to support Teresa's story of a random home invasion. When she returned to find both men shot dead, her performance began immediately. She presented herself as the traumatized survivor, the innocent victim of violence that had destroyed her family. Her tears were calculated, her shock rehearsed, her grief manufactured for investigators. But contract killings create their own vulnerabilities. Within days of the murders, both Schallenberger and Fuller were providing detailed confessions that exposed Teresa as the architect of the entire conspiracy. The same criminal relationships that made murder for hire possible also made such crimes exceptionally difficult to conceal. Prosecutors sought the death penalty. The evidence against Teresa was overwhelming once her co-conspirators revealed the truth. The $250,000 insurance policy provided undeniable motive. The coordinated alibis revealed extensive planning. Most damaging were the detailed testimonies from both gunmen, who described Teresa not as a victim, but as the mastermind who had orchestrated every aspect of their crimes. In her trial, Teresa pleaded guilty to capital murder, conspiracy, and robbery, perhaps recognizing that denying her role would only make her appear more calculating to jurors who already knew the truth. The jury sentenced her to death, making her the first woman to face execution in Virginia since 1912. Teresa Lewis spent 8 years on Virginia's death row. Her appeals were repeatedly denied, with her final appeal rejected by the courts shortly before her scheduled execution. On September 23, 2010, 41-year-old Teresa was executed by lethal injection at Greensville Correctional Center. She requested a final meal of fried chicken, green peas, applesauce, a slice of German chocolate cake, and a Dr. Pepper. Prison officials granted her request. Strapped to the gurney, Teresa gave her final statement expressing remorse for her actions and asking for forgiveness for the families of her victims. She was pronounced dead at 9:13 p.m., becoming the first woman executed in Virginia in nearly a century. Her execution closed a chapter on one of Virginia's most calculated contract killings, a case that demonstrated how financial greed could transform a wife and stepmother into a cold-blooded killer who saw her own family as nothing more than insurance policies to be collected. With Teresa Lewis's execution carried out, Virginia had demonstrated its willingness to execute women who orchestrated the most heinous crimes. Her case would be remembered as an example of how manipulation and greed could drive someone to eliminate their own family for profit. 6. Suzanne Basso, the monster in plain sight. Adults with intellectual disabilities face a sobering reality. They are 7 times more likely to become victims of violent crime than the general population. Predators target them specifically because of their vulnerability, trusting nature, and limited ability to defend themselves. Suzanne Margaret Basso understood this cruel arithmetic perfectly, and she used it to orchestrate one of the most calculated and heinous crimes in recent memory. At 44, Suzanne had mastered the art of manipulation. She could identify vulnerability from across a room and transform it into opportunity within hours. When she met 59-year-old Louis Buddy Musso through personal ads, she didn't see a potential partner. She saw dollar signs and an insurance policy waiting to be cashed. Buddy lived quietly in New Jersey, collecting disability benefits and dreaming of companionship in his golden years. His intellectual disability gave him the emotional capacity of a child in an aging man's body, making him both heartbreakingly innocent and devastatingly naive. Suzanne didn't court Buddy because she loved him. She had already decided to kill him and needed his trust to make the murder profitable. Her plan required relocating Buddy from New Jersey to Texas, isolating him from anyone who might protect him or ask uncomfortable questions. She convinced him their future together lay in Jacinto City, where she had assembled a team of accomplices that included her own son. Buddy packed his life into boxes and traveled halfway across the country to meet his death, believing he was moving toward love and happiness. August 1998 marked the beginning of Buddy's final nightmare. What Suzanne orchestrated wasn't simply murder, it was systematic torture that lasted for days. Multiple people treated a disabled man's suffering as entertainment, inflicting prolonged agony because cruelty had become the point. They wanted him to suffer, and they wanted that suffering to last. When authorities discovered Buddy's body on August 25, 1998, the forensic evidence told a story so horrific that seasoned investigators struggled to process what they were seeing. The extent of trauma revealed that Buddy had endured unimaginable suffering over multiple days before death finally released him. Suzanne's reaction to questioning was as calculated as everything else she had done. She denied involvement with cold precision, maintaining her innocence even when co-defendants confessed and identified her as the mastermind. The 1999 trial exposed Suzanne as something beyond a typical killer. Prosecutors presented evidence of a woman who had targeted the most vulnerable victim possible, lured him across state lines specifically to torture and murder him, and orchestrated days of suffering for financial gain. Her defense team's attempts to claim mental incompetence crumbled against the methodical nature of her planning. Police had charged Suzanne with capital murder, and prosecutors sought the death penalty. The jury convicted her and sentenced her to death, rejecting arguments for leniency based on her troubled background. On February 5, 2014, after 15 years on death row, 59-year-old Suzanne faced lethal injection at the Huntsville unit in Texas. She became the 14th woman executed in the United States since the reinstatement of capital punishment. Strapped to the gurney, Suzanne was asked if she had any final words. Her response was chillingly simple, "Not at all. I'm good. Ready to go." At 6:26 p.m., the lethal injection began. She was pronounced dead at 6:41 p.m. With Suzanne Basso's execution carried out, her case stands as a stark reminder of how predators exploit society's most vulnerable members, and how the justice system responds when such calculated evil targets those least able to defend themselves. 7. Kelly Gissendaner, the gospel singer on death row. On September 30, 2015, Kelly Gissendaner became the first woman executed in Georgia in 70 years. But what led a suburban wife and mother to orchestrate her husband's murder? In 1997, 28-year-old Kelly Renee Gissendaner had grown tired of being married to Douglas. Her 30-year-old husband represented routine and responsibility in their Gwinnett County home, while Kelly wanted excitement with her boyfriend Gregory Owen. More importantly, Doug's life insurance policy would fund her fresh start. Kelly's plan was methodical. She convinced Gregory Owen to kill her husband while she maintained the perfect alibi. On February 7, 1997, Kelly provided Owen with a knife and arranged for Doug to meet him under the pretense of reconciling their troubled marriage. Owen forced Doug to drive to a remote location in Gwinnett County, where he stabbed him to death and set his car on fire. While Owen committed the actual murder, Kelly positioned herself at a nightclub, establishing her whereabouts when investigators would later ask questions. Her performance as the worried wife was calculated to fool everyone who knew her. The deception lasted 1 week. When Doug's body was discovered, the investigation quickly unraveled Kelly's conspiracy. Gregory Owen confessed and revealed Kelly as the mastermind who had orchestrated her husband's death for insurance money. Police charged Kelly with murder, conspiracy, and other related crimes. Prosecutors sought the death penalty, arguing that she was more culpable than Owen because she had manipulated him into committing the crime while keeping her own hands clean. In November 1998, Kelly was convicted of murder and sentenced to death. Owen received life in prison with the possibility of parole after agreeing to testify against her. The jury rejected Kelly's defense arguments about her troubled childhood and mental health issues. During her 18 years on death row, Kelly underwent what appeared to be a genuine religious transformation. She studied theology, earned a degree, and ministered to fellow inmates. Her spiritual conversion became the foundation for clemency appeals that attracted national attention and support from prominent religious leaders. Kelly's case raised complex questions about redemption and whether genuine transformation should influence capital punishment decisions. Supporters argued her complete rehabilitation proved the possibility of change, while prosecutors maintained that premeditated murder deserved the ultimate penalty regardless of subsequent transformation. Georgia's Board of Pardons and Paroles denied Kelly's clemency petition despite unprecedented support from religious leaders, including the daughter of murder victim Coretta Scott King and Pope Francis. The board ruled that her transformation, while notable, could not overcome the calculated nature of her crime. Kelly's final meal consisted of cheese dip with Tostitos and Texas nachos. Strapped to the gurney at Georgia Diagnostic and Classification Prison, she was asked for her final words. She chose to sing Amazing Grace before expressing love for her children and remorse to the Jissainer family. At 12:21 a.m., the lethal injection began. Kelly was pronounced dead at 12:21 a.m., becoming the first woman executed in Georgia since 1945. She was 47 years old. With Kelly Gissendaner's execution carried out, her case remains one of Georgia's most controversial capital punishment decisions, highlighting ongoing debates about gender, manipulation, and the possibility of redemption in the face of calculated murder. 8. Lisa Montgomery, the federal execution that shattered history. Between 1953 and 2021, the federal government executed exactly 0 women. On January 13, 2021, Lisa Montgomery changed that statistic forever. But what did she do to become the first woman to face federal execution in nearly 7 decades? On December 16, 2004, 36-year-old Lisa Marie Montgomery drove from her home in Kansas to Skidmore, Missouri, to meet 23-year-old Bobby Jissainer. The two women had connected online through their shared interest in dog breeding, and Lisa had arranged to visit under the pretense of buying a puppy. Lisa had been telling friends and family that she was pregnant, but this was a lie. She had fabricated the pregnancy for months, even convincing her husband that they were expecting a child together. As her supposed due date approached, Lisa needed to produce a baby to maintain her deception. Bobby Jo was 8 months pregnant when Lisa arrived at her home that December afternoon. Lisa attacked Bobby Jo, strangling her with a rope. After Bobby Jo lost consciousness, Lisa used a kitchen knife to perform a crude cesarean section, removing the unborn child from her victim's womb. Bobby Jo died from her injuries. Lisa then took the infant, who had survived the attack, and drove back to Kansas. She presented the baby to her husband as their newborn child, claiming she had given birth at a birthing center in Topeka. Lisa's husband was initially suspicious about the circumstances, but Lisa maintained her story. The deception lasted less than 24 hours. When Bobby Jo's mother discovered her daughter's body, police immediately launched an investigation. Digital evidence quickly led authorities to Lisa, who had used her real name and contact information in her online communications with Bobby Jo about the dog purchase. FBI agents arrested Lisa at her home in Kansas the following day. They found Bobby Jo's infant daughter, who was immediately returned to the victim's family. The baby, named Victoria Jo, had survived the attack and was physically unharmed. Federal prosecutors charged Lisa with kidnapping resulting in death, which carries a potential death sentence. The case became federal because Lisa had crossed state lines to commit the crime. Prosecutors argued that Lisa had planned the attack methodically, researching cesarean procedures online and bringing rope and a knife to Bobby Jo's home. Lisa's defense team argued that she suffered from severe mental illness caused by decades of sexual abuse and torture during her childhood. They presented evidence of brain damage and psychiatric disorders that they claimed made her unable to understand the nature of her actions. Mental health experts testified about the extreme trauma Lisa had endured throughout her life. In October 2007, a federal jury convicted Lisa of kidnapping resulting in death. During the penalty phase, the same jury sentenced her to death, rejecting arguments that her mental illness warranted a life sentence instead. Lisa's case spent 14 years in federal courts, as her attorneys filed numerous appeals challenging both her conviction and death sentence. Her lawyers continued to argue that executing someone with severe mental illness violated constitutional protections against cruel and unusual punishment. The case attracted attention from mental health advocates, who argued that Lisa's history of extreme abuse had destroyed her ability to distinguish right from wrong. Supporters pointed to her traumatic childhood, which included being trafficked by her own mother, as evidence that she should not be held fully responsible for her actions. In December 2020, a federal judge stayed Lisa's execution, scheduled for that month, citing concerns about her mental competency. However, a federal appeals court overturned that stay in January 2021, clearing the way for her execution to proceed. Lisa's final meal consisted of a chocolate milkshake and asparagus. Strapped to the gurney at the Federal Correctional Complex in Terre Haute, Indiana, she was asked for final words. She whispered prayers and apologized to Bobby Jo's family before the lethal injection began. At 1:31 a.m., Lisa was pronounced dead. She was 52 years old and became the first woman executed by the federal government since Bonnie Brown Hetty in 1953. With Lisa Montgomery's execution carried out, her case remains controversial, highlighting ongoing debates about mental illness, childhood trauma, and their role in capital punishment decisions. 8 women, 8 death sentences, 8 executions that redefined the meaning of ultimate betrayal in American criminal history. From Wanda Jean Allen's tragic pattern of violence to Lisa Montgomery's federal execution that shattered nearly 7 decades of precedent, these cases force us to confront uncomfortable truths about gender, justice, and the capacity for evil that exists within seemingly ordinary relationships. The statistics are undeniable. Women represent only 3% of all executions since 1976, yet when they kill their spouses, they face death sentences at rates that expose deep biases about feminine nature and martial betrayal. These weren't crimes of passion or desperation. They were calculated business transactions written in blood, insurance policies cashed through murder, and wedding vows transformed into death contracts. Each case raises questions that extend far beyond the execution chamber. Should severe mental illness excuse premeditated murder? Can genuine religious transformation earn redemption for calculated killing? Does the justice system punish female killers more harshly because they violate societal expectations about nurturing and protection? These women joined the most exclusive and terrifying club in American criminal history, not through momentary lapses in judgment, but through deliberate choices that prioritize greed, manipulation, and self-interest over human life. Their stories serve as chilling reminders that the greatest danger often comes not from strangers in dark alleys, but from those who share our beds, our homes, and our trust. What other cases from around the world reveal similar patterns of betrayal? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to True Crime Inquiry for more shocking cases that changed America forever.